Good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us to the CML Connect Meet for an Operational Cure webinar. It gives me great pleasure to introduce our two chairpersons, Dr. VP Chaudhary, chairperson and senior consultant hematology at the Fortis Escorts Hospital, Faridabad, and also Dr. Subhash Verma, chairperson, director, and internal medicine specialist, Fortis Hospital, Mohali, and also our program director, who's none other than Dr. Rahul Bhargava, director and head hematology and BMT, Fortis Memorial Research Institute, Gurugram. So without wasting any further time, I would now hand over the mic to Dr. VP Chaudhary, sir. Over to you, sir.
Hello, good evening. Right at the outset, hello.
Yes,
Am
sir.
I audible?
Sir. Yes, sir, you're audible.
Okay. Right at the outset, I thank the Novartis Group to organize this CML Connect, which will give us the latest update on the management of CML. Before we go on that, he has already introduced the director, Dr. Bhargava, Rahul Bhargava. Now, the CML, as we know, the first breakthrough was identification of BCR-ABL mutation. And the first thing which changed the whole scenario on the management of therapy for the CML was TKI-1, which was taken as a gold bullet to cure the CML. However, with the subsequent development, now we have a second generation TKI, and then the ELN things have come up, which is trying to tell how to monitor and how to manage such patients. So in the next hour or so, during the CML meet, we are going to hear what is the latest and how the total scenario of the management of CML has changed. A disease which was initially considered as incurable, today we say it is the first disease which has been taken as cure, and we always talk of a cure rates in the CML management. I have passed on to Dr. Bhargav, who will introduce the speaker, and we continue with this CML meet. Dr. Bhargav, please. Rahul.
Thank you, sir. Thanks for inviting and having this great lineup of speakers, galaxy of speakers who are going to speak about CML. The thing is, there are many things which have changed over a period of time in CML. And why we are still talking about CML is because we need to go more into the depth of the disease biology as an individualization by doing the individualization of the drugs. And we have not generic dasatinib available now. Has generic dasatinib changed the scenario? If we looked at around, say, 100 odd prescriptions from various practices, various places, still imatinib seems to be dominating the world of CML. It has still not changed that we have moved over to dasatinib as a frontline therapy. And we did talk about it last year when the dasatinib was launched in April. We did talk about the TFR and the early stages of early utilization of dasatinib and nilotinib and a second generation TKI. But has it really changed? That we are still seeing it. It's still not changed quite a bit. But at the same time, the oral generic dasatinib, though has promised the moon, but still seems to have an odd complication rates which are slightly higher, and we are waiting for the responses from various trials which hematology HCC is doing, Hematology Cancer Congress, under the leadership of Dr. Vikram Matthews is trying to do, of seeing 50 is good enough or not, because the MD Anderson paper talks about 50 milligram is as good as 100 milligrams, so why to give more? And as we have started moving from imatinib to a frontline dasatinib therapy, we did encounter quite amount of side effects in terms of 100 milligram when we are giving. And I would request the speakers to elaborate on their own experiences of dasatinib's use as a frontline with 100 milligram. And when you drop down to 50, people have tolerated well. And yes, the TFR concept, which was initiated by Novartis years back, now catching up fast, because we know these young generation people, 24, 30 years, 35, 40 years, these people are looking for TFR and they don't want the medication to go on for lifelong, because the medication comes at its own cost and its own side effects. So it will be very heartening to learn and listen to what is new, which is happening in the era of generic dasatinib, and how the Indian landscape has changed over a period of time. And what are ironical that even after such a long association for 10 years for nilotinib and almost a similar time for, or 12 to 13 years for dasatinib and nilotinib. They are still called second generation TKIs. They have not moved on to the frontline therapy. So I would say very interesting philosophies which are happening. So we do very little time on CML, but I would say it's worthwhile giving your time on CML because this is one of the diseases where you can actually make people survive till near normal. And that's what the Western world is looking at. So it will be great to listen to the galaxy of speakers which we have, starting from Dr. Neeti Raizada, who happens to be my senior from Bhopal and doing a wonderful job in Bangalore. So over to Dr. Neeti Raizada for her talk. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Rahul. It was a lovely introduction. I sincerely thank Dr. Chaudhary and Dr. Subhash today and Rahul for inviting me. And thanks Novartis for organizing this event. It actually means a lot because our regular updates help us in updating, and especially when we have new guidelines in our mind. So let me start with the ELN 2020 guidelines. This is an assortment. I mean, these guidelines were laid by about 34 experts from across the continents. And surprisingly, the fund was generated by these experts. And the funding agency remains this limited ELN network. And I think the scope of which is expanding every day. So what has been the objective of managing a CML patient now? The focus remains on quality of life and avoiding long-term organ toxicity. Then, of course, as Rahul mentioned, the identifications of strategies to maximize the possibility of stopping TKI therapy, resulting in so-called treatment-free remissions. So we all know that CML over the period of time has evolved as a chronic condition with age-related comorbidities and no longer remains as the primary cause of disability and death in such patients. So starting with the diagnostic workup, most of the patients will require, of course, after history and physicals and complete blood picture, should do a bone marrow aspirate, which requires morphology, and also to look for proportion of blast cells and basophil and for cytogenetics. Additional baseline test includes chromosomal banding analysis, FISH studies for specific cases, qualitative or quantitative RT-PCR. Quantitative at baseline is not mandatory in all the cases, and mutation analysis by either Sanger sequencing or next-gen sequencing whenever required. What's the importance of bone marrow biopsy or core biopsy? It remains valuable in about 25% of CML patients because firstly, it identifies the disease phase and of course, what is the proportion of myelofibrosis. And this myelofibrosis in the initial grade decides what is the outcome after therapy. We also need to repeat a bone marrow biopsy when there's an accelerated phase or blast crisis, and also when there is any other suggestion of disease progression. Along with this, we have to look for high-risk ACA, that is additional chromosomal abnormality, and any patient who has high-risk ACA directly account to high-risk subset of patients. And these patients have high risk of disease progression. Then along with this, we have to understand that 2 to 4% of all patients have atypical BCR-ABL transcripts. Now, this atypical BCR-ABL transcript do not show on the routine primers or probes, which we use for quantitative or qualitative RT-PCR, and therefore it can give false impression at diagnosis. And therefore, it's important to have a clinical suspicion, identify these patients, and whenever necessary, FISH or a next-gen sequencing should be ordered. The definitions of molecular response was revised, and according to ELN, it should be based on the international scoring system, in which IS, international scale, should be used based on log reduction. So less than 2 times log reduction is equal to 1%, and 3 log reduction is equal to 0.1%, and so on and so forth. We have MR 4.5 and MR 5 as well. Major molecular response is when it is less than 0.1%. We should actually avoid using the term complete molecular response, and we should substitute it to molecular undetectable leukemia. What monitoring is required from the time of diagnosis? When the blood counts are high, we have to repeat blood counts and differentials every 2 weeks till we attain complete hematological response. After which, quantitative BCR-ABL should be performed every 3 months. And even after achieving major molecular response, it should be continued every 3 months or as often as feasible. Cytogenetics need to do when there's atypical translocation, when they are rare or atypical BCR-ABL transcripts that cannot be identified by quant PCR, or when there is treatment failure or resistance documented, and when there is progression to accelerated phase or blast crisis. Risk assessment, according to ELN, should move from SOCAL score, which we were doing until now, to UTOS long-term survival score. What's the advantage of this revised ELTS score? It predicts leukemia-related death, that is the LRD probability, better. It is based on positive long-term survival of leukemia patients who have been treated with TKI, unlike SOCAL score, which was based on conventional chemotherapy treatment. And it decreases the impact of age as a negative prognostic value in this calculation. So what we have to understand is both the scores, SOCAL and ELTS, have the same parameters, but there's redistribution of scoring. So the calculation values differ, and it is both of them again divide into low risk, intermediate risk, and high risk. ELTS has various calculators available widely on the net, and one of which could be downloaded. What's new in management? We all know, with the exception of pregnancy, the first line therapy remains a tyrosine kinase inhibitor. Whenever we are awaiting molecular or cytogenetic confirmation, we can still use hydroxyurea till the higher WBC count or platelet count is under control. The 4 approved TKIs by FDA and EMA remains imatinib, dasatinib, nilotinib, and bosutinib. Radotinib is not available in any country outside South Korea, and it does not have FDA and EMA approval. ELN has a special mention of generics. We have all the generics in our country, as Rahul mentioned, and it specifically mentions imatinib and its role because of cost consideration in developing countries and underdeveloped countries. So what is the first line selection based on? Well, the primary underlying factor is the comorbs, and we have to keep in mind the non-hematological effects of all the drugs which we use. We have to understand that 30% of these drugs are withdrawn or reduced or dose modified just because of the side effects, which affects the tolerability and quality of life. And another 15% would have some kind of complication to this drugs, which can cause actually even death and significantly affect health. How do we achieve milestones? All is based on international scale, and at 3 months, if IS is still greater than 10%, it is called as treatment failure, or at any point, if there are resistance mutations noted, or there's a high risk ACI noted, this is called as treatment failure. What are the parameters which define treatment failure? Well, we know that imatinib resistance is seen in about 10 to 15% of all CML patients. Second generation TKIs have less known resistance when they are given in the first line settings, approximately less than 10%. And first thing which we need to see is the compliance or adherence to treatment of such patients. In the second line treatment, the most important thing is to establish what is the BCR-ABL kinase domains mutation noted. And based on this, the therapy is decided. The second important factor is the toxicity, which was noted in the first line setting. And of course, the comorbs, age, and other patient-related factors. Once we have BCR-ABL kinase domain mutation studies available, treatment is based on this, whether it's nilotinib, bosutinib, or ponatinib. A very specific mutation, that is T315I, only ponatinib is the drug of choice. At this juncture, does not seem to be available in our country. However, it can be procured through other routes. And wherever feasible, we should try to do more sensitive method of testing, that is next-gen sequencing. Although Sanger sequencing seems to be more specific, however, the sensitivity rate of NGS remains very high. So as I already said, that the choice of TKI is guided by the BCR-ABL kinase domain mutations. Gatekeeper mutation whenever possible, the only drug of choice remains ponatinib. And we have, if there is suboptimal response to 2 or more TKIs, then this should lead to prompt consideration of allogenic stem cell transplant. A brief word about ponatinib, which was established by OPTIC trials, which also discuss the various doses of ponatinib. This is a drug by Takeda, third generation TKI, and the indications are all patients who have received 2 or more TKIs in the past and who are resistant to those treatment, or any patient who has BCR-ABL T315I mutation at baseline or eventually. FDA approves 45 milligram as a standard dose. However, the ELN panel recommends to start it at a lower dose, that is usually at 15 milligram, and then to establish the molecular response and then escalate it to either 30 milligram or 45 milligram. Almost 30% of all patients have some kind of cardiovascular toxicity, and this is dose dependent. However, the difference between 15 milligram and 45 milligram of dose causing arterial occlusive events does not seem to be remarkably different. This is not a part of ELN guidelines. However, I wanted to mention this drug briefly. Asciminib, which was spoken about in ASH 2020, is the first in class TAMP inhibitor, also the allosteric inhibitor, and it is used in chronic phase CML. At this juncture, the phase 3 trial establishes its role in more than 2 lines of TKI failure. However, there are more attempts to put it higher earlier in the course of treatment. The MMR in the trial, which was the landmark trial, showed that at 24 weeks, 25% achieved good MMR with asciminib versus half of it, that is 13% with bosutinib. Yes, it is also known to cause arterial occlusive disease, but it is significantly less as compared to ponatinib. Interestingly, this trial had excluded the translocation 315I mutation patients. However, this is a drug which is again effective in this mutation as well. Talking about treatment-free remissions, well, the guiding criteria are mandatory criteria and minimal criteria. And the minimal criteria include that the duration of TKI therapy should be at least 5 years for trying to withdraw TKIs. The duration of deep molecular response, that is MR4 or better, should be at least 2 years. And there should be no prior documented treatment failure. How will we manage end phase CML? Well, first thing is to check the compliance of treatment. When there's a primary blast phase, we would want to start imatinib and change to TKI earlier in the course. When there's a resistance to second generation TKI, ponatinib or an experimental agent should be used. And there should be an early assessment for allogenic transplant with a donor search. When there's a failure of ponatinib, again, with a high risk of progression, early allogenic transplant is advised. In accelerated phase, whichever TKI can achieve the best response and then move to allogenic transplant. If a patient already has blast crisis, based on myeloid or lymphoid blast crisis, a regimen could be chosen between FLAG-IDA or hyper-CVAD along with a TKI. And then as soon as as soon as remission is achieved or CP2 is achieved, to move to allogenic transplant. In terms of parenting and pregnancy, for men, any TKI, there's no risk of increased congenital anomalies. Whereas for women, TKI should be discontinued as soon as pregnancy is established. TKIs, all the TKIs as a class effect are teratogenic and most likely due to PDGFR inhibition noted. So it's contraindicated in pregnancy. A woman who's eligible for trial of a treatment-free remission should be given a trial, and therefore TKI should be discontinued for the patient who wants to conceive. In a very rare instance, leukophoresis or interferon alpha could be used. So in summary, allogenic stem cell transplant remains an important option when there's resistance or intolerance noted to 2 or more TKI. Almost 6% of patients still progress to blast phase. All TKIs are teratogenic and contraindicated during pregnancy. And there's a recent, several recent small studies which show that PEG interferon along with a combination of TKI may actually deepen responses. And this still remains investigational. A current investigation showing comparison of nilotinib with PEG interferon has shown that it is superior as compared to nilotinib alone. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Dr. Neeti, for interesting talk. Asciminib, it will be a new game changer for all of us because it's going to be approved for T315I mutation, which was not there for, except the ponatinib, there was nothing. Asciminib is going to change quite a lot, many things, because in December, there's going to get launched in India. Till that time, they're giving as a compassionate-based access to the patients in chronic phase and so on and so forth. So Novartis is bringing new medications for T315I mutation and showing the path that revolution is taking place into the arena of CML as well. But still the transplant remains, for the few patients, still remains the curative modality. So very interesting talk, and we all need to follow the guidelines in a proper manner so that the survival can increase. Over to the next speaker. I would like to invite Dr. Amit Bhargav. He's a senior consultant, medical oncology, Fortis Escorts Hospital, Faridabad. He's going to talk about nilotinib, a journey of 10 years in CML. Over to Dr. Amit Bhargav.
Rahul sir, Dr. Amit has not logged in yet. So can we take some questions for Niti ma'am if possible?
Sure, or we can move on to Dr. Subhash Sharma's case presentation, because I think the maximum learning is going to be there. Over to Dr. Subhash Sharma, sir, for your interesting, as a chairperson for case presentation and being a moderator, being the Dr. Pranta Chakravarti. Over to Dr. Verma, sir.
Thank you, Rahul, and good evening, everybody. So as I think Dr. Razdan has very nicely set the stage for us to discuss real life scenarios as to what needs to be done in these settings. And we have Dr. Pranta Chakravarti, who would be discussing it with a group of panelists as to what would they do in a particular setting. Over to Pranta.
Okay, thank you, sir. The only problem is that my laptop is in another room. I thought mine was supposed to start at 7:45. So I'll just take 2 minutes. Otherwise, sure, without slides also, but I'll try to project it from my phone itself. So I'll just need 2 minutes, sir.
Okay, right. So till then, I think maybe we can go to Dr. Razdan and ask her some questions on. She had a very lucid presentation.
Yes.
So I think you did discuss about the role of interferon. So is there any role for interferon and cytosine arabinoside in patients who are failing second generation or third generation TKI?
So actually interferon alpha in combination with TKIs is recommended. So that's what I was saying, that there are certain studies which have shown that with second line failure, we could probably deepen response by just adding PEG interferon and interferon alpha. And we know that we moved from cytosine arabinoside and interferon era to imatinib with IRIS trial. And now again going back to that by speaking about interferon.
I was just thinking, you know, when all of these have failed and you are waiting for a transplant, would you actually like to go back to, I mean, obviously the complete response rates are actually dismal in these individuals, even with interferon and cytosine, but it might actually control disease for adequate period of time before you can take a person up for transplantation.
Absolutely, Dr. Verma. Actually, we have tried in T315I mutation in these patients awaiting transplant. Even azacitidine and interferon has worked well for these patients, at least for controlling the disease.
So would there be any reason for us to, you know, say cytosine versus azacitidine and this thing, should there be a kind of a workup done for these things? Should one compare them?
So we can actually speaking, we can see into it. The interferon has still not lost its meaning in India. We keep on moving to Mars, but there's still too much of a ground which needs to be covered in India itself. So people might not be able to, after imatinib, they might not be able to afford any other medications except interferon, or they are going towards accelerated phase where the platelets are still borderline. They can use interferon at that moment of time. So I would say those things have still not lost its relevance, and azacitidine, where we have started utilizing, is in a blast crisis. So I keep on traveling to rural hinterlands. You'll be amazed, sir. In Gorakhpur, it took 20 years to reach imatinib itself. So in 2019, we started utilizing imatinib. Otherwise, all the people were on hydroxyurea. So I think azacitidine has its role if there's an accelerated phase, and we have got nothing else to do.
Okay, all right. So maybe in some situations we might do it, or if you have suboptimal response, and if you, I mean, how many times do you have suboptimal response, but you don't really see any TKI mutation?
So I think practically it happens quite often.
Yeah.
And in fact, we try to change the modality of testing because we are not sure whether we used a method which was not adequate. But at the same time, it's like it's often.
And how many times have you got atypical transcripts? Because the BCR-ABL comes as negative, and then you do a FISH, and FISH is 95% positive.
So, I mean, it happens occasionally because the suspicion is so strong, but we still don't have a report which confirms it. And then we try to redo the whole thing.
So then you go for NGS?
NGS.
So have you found a different transcript in these individuals after you've gone for NGS?
So I think if I remember, I have seen in only 2-3 patients.
Yeah, because so is it the issue with labs that we are having at times, or is it the transcripts?
But most of the time we use the same lab for.
I know, but I mean, it's just variable.
It could be, sir, because the probes or primers they are using are very specific to the common transcripts.
I think we've taken 2 minutes. Is Dr. Pranthar ready or no?
The problem is, sir, it's not opening from the Google Drive.
Okay.
So maybe I can show my face and go on with it. Okay. I think that is possible. Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
are your panelists ready? Are you going to introduce your panelists now? And then you can read out the problem, and then you can ask them the questions. Is that okay?
Yeah. That would do. But I'm.
Or Rahul, is Dr. Bhargava available?
The panelists there? Yeah.
Sir, all your panelists have logged in except for Dr. Amit.
Okay. So I'll just introduce my panelists. I think that would be a good thing. Just give me a second. Dr. Amrita Chakravarti is there from Fortis. Dr. Meet Kumar is there. Dr. Divesh Goyal is there. And Dr. Uma Dangi is there, correct? Because from the phone,
yes,
I
sir.
anyone. Can you please,
Yeah.
Mr. Parekh, can you please introduce the panelists on my behalf? Because I'm not able to see anyone.
Pranthar, yeah, I think we should be able to see each one of them now.
Yeah. So as they're coming online, I'll just start my video. So I'm there. Dr. Divesh is there. Thanks for joining. Dr. Meet is there. Hi. Dr. Uma is there. Dr. Amrita, are you there?
Amrita, ma'am, you'll have to unmute your mic, ma'am.
Same with Dr. Uma, right?
Ma'am, sir, Dr. Uma has logged in. Dr.
Yeah,
Niti is
sir. I'm here. Good evening.
Good evening. Yeah. So I think I'll start off because I have not been able to share the slides from my phone, which was a challenge for me. What I'll do is I'll tell you the entire story. You can chip in your advice at every point of time. So the first case I have is a young female, young unmarried 23-year-old female who has just joined a new IT job and incidentally developed fever. So during fever, she had a high count. It was neutrophilic leukocytosis, and they found a patch. They thought it was pneumonia. She received IV antibiotics, and the fever subsided. After that, they found that the neutrophilic leukocytosis was persisting. The total count was 27,000. Neutrophils were 87%. Basophils were not seen, and there were 1% metamyelocytes. So, we all have seen such patients. So any one of you could please volunteer and tell me that in this young patient, one of you could volunteer as to, Dr. Niti has given you an excellent idea of what the investigations have to be sent. But the problem is, I would rather say, as Rahul was saying, that you might not have the facilities. And the other problem is that how do we go about counseling this young person if CML is detected. So for diagnosis, can anyone tell me whether you routinely do a bone marrow aspiration and refine biopsy or not? Anyone, please.
Yes, sir. For CML diagnosis, I'm routinely doing bone marrow testing. It's mainly for knowing the baseline mutations. And also, like Dr. Niti nicely pointed out, the biopsy is very necessary to see if there is any fibrosis or if there are any clusters of blasts which would change the phase of CML. So yes, I'm doing it routinely.
You're doing it. But I think in a center where there are so many patients, are others doing it also?
Yes.
Yes.
We are all doing bone marrow aspiration and biopsy upfrontly.
Okay. Now, in what percentage in your experience have you found that there are additional cytogenetic anomalies when you have sent karyotype? That is my next question.
They are very rare. Yeah. Please, Doctor.
Yeah.
So they are definitely very rare to happen, sir. So like maybe less than 10% of the patients we do encountered maybe an additional Philadelphia or an additional cytogenetic abnormality other than a Philadelphia in routine cytogenetic or FISH analysis.
Right. So how many of us do send FISH if we are already sending a BCR-ABL?
I do send actually, though there is, I know, but sometimes, because you collect the sample at the same time, I'm not going to do another marrow on that patient. So I always collect a sample, do send for conventional karyotype and FISH at the same time. Because if the conventional karyotype doesn't give me an answer, then I do need to send for FISH. So, it just, it helps. So that's why it's at baseline. So I just collect it at one go.
Okay. And the next question I would ask is, as Dr. Nidhi pointed out, that doing a quantitative BCR-ABL at the first visit.
So you lost you.
I can't hear, sir. Is
You can't hear me, sir?
So we can hear you now, sir. Sir, I've just stopped your video because your bandwidth is a little low. So there you go, sir. Sir, are you able to? Yeah, yes, sir. We can hear you now, sir. Hello.
Dr. Pranta, can you hear us?
Yes, I can hear you, but I don't know whether you can hear me.
Yeah, we can hear you. We are not seeing you, so you carry on.
Okay. I think because of bandwidth problems, it will come back. Oh, the host has disabled me. Okay.
Yeah.
That's why you can't see my video. No
sir, it's due to the bandwidth, sir. Otherwise, we couldn't hear you for a point. That's why I've disabled the video, sir.
Okay. Fine. So no problem. So what I was asking is that if you're not doing a BCR-ABL quantitative international standard at diagnosis, would you face problems in monitoring this patient? That was my question. Dr. Divesh can volunteer.
No, sir. If we are not doing upfrontly, then I am not facing. I will repeat at 3 months or 6 months. If I have not done this.
Okay. Now I'm asking, what is the usual practice? Do you do it or do you do?
No, sir. I am doing BCR-ABL upfrontly, international scale, quantitative.
Okay. So
I would do qualitative as well as quantitative. Qualitative would be necessary to rule out the transcript.
Yeah. It would identify the transcript. So I think that's why at least we know which the transcript is, because otherwise there might be a nip. So if you get this young lady at your clinic, and I come to another young hematologist here, that she has got a Philadelphia chromosome in her karyotype and BCR-ABL qualitative is positive. Now, what do you start her on and what do you tell her? Dr. Amrita, please. Are you there, Dr. Amrita?
Amrita ma'am, you'll have to unmute your mic.
We can't hear her. Is it still muted?
Sir, her mic is muted, so we're trying to unmute it.
Okay,
I
okay.
request you to go.
Okay, then someone else can chip in, and by the time Amrita joins, we'll again get her opinion. Yeah, Meet.
I'll take this, sir. So, so at baseline, when we have confirmed the diagnosis of CML with a BCR-ABL positivity, either qualitative and quantitative or quantitative BCR-ABL, then we should calculate a scoring system, whether it is a Sokal score or the Utah score. So what I am using personally is a Sokal score based scoring system. Probably, like as Dr. Neeti had previously said, it's readily available on the net. It's very simple. You just Google, you open the scoring system, calculate the scoring system based on age, the gender, the blast percentage, all those things. You just calculate that, and depending on if it's falling into more than 1.2, the high Sokal score, probably it's good to go for a second generation TKI. Otherwise, to go for if low and intermediate risk, then to go for a imatinib based first generation TKI. That's my personal choice. But of course, there is data coming up to go for an upfront second generation TKI, irrespective of the scoring system and all. But yes, that needs to be proven in the larger cohorts. As of now, what I am doing is this practice, depending on the Sokal score, to decide about the first or second generation TKI.
Okay. So my only question here would be that ELN is telling us that we should use the UTOS long-term score so that we get better, idea about the longevity. So any ideas or thoughts on that? Any one of you can volunteer. Because that is what the...
So I think the point of the ELTS is that, because as CML patients are living longer, there have been other reasons for the death of the patient. So now what ELTS is trying to do is it's telling us how, what is the probability of the patient dying because of the leukemia itself. So I think it would be more relevant here. Secondly, in this patient, she's a young lady. So here I would have to, so there are a lot of things that you look at when, when we start talking about treatment for CML. First and foremost is the, like Dr. Neeti very nicely pointed out, it's very important to understand the compliance, because, if you give a drug, which is, if it is very expensive and she's not going to afford it, she's going to have lapses, which is not a good thing. So the affordability, the how good the compliance is going to be is very, very important. Being a young girl, and obviously they're probably going to look at eventual fertility, having children in the future. In this situation here, I guess, like the ELN 2020 are also looking at is the TFR, or the treatment-free interval, where she could possibly conceive and have a normal life. So these few options are something that I would really discuss with her in detail before planning treatment.
So, Dr. Prantar, I think we should, all of us, in fact, till recently, we write Sokal score in all our papers, but we have to move to UTOS, because we know that this is the score which calculates TKI exposure. And Sokal score was until now only calculating chemotherapy and response. That is one. And as Dr. Uma said, that age is now no more a criteria. It is becoming less and less of a criteria, because people with CML will possibly die of other causes and not actually CML. So I think the parameters remain the same: spleen size, blast percentage, platelet count at baseline. All these parameters remain the same, but the weightage of all of them has changed. So I think moving to ELN score or UTOS score makes sense. And in this case, obviously, because she may have, we have to discuss future, we have to discuss what is does she have a plan to conceive in near future, or, what are her options for fertility? And based on that, we have to decide a drug, if cost allows, which can actually give deeper molecular response at earlier on. So we can consider TFR, or treatment remission.
Yeah, so actually I can tell Meet that if you can do Sokal on any app, you can also do the UTOS, right? So the only thing is, I think what Dr. Uma said, that is very important, in this lady, will you discuss TFR upfront? See, because I started hematology the year imatinib was officially approved. So our standard point was, we will tell you later, but now you take it lifelong.
अभी ना मेरी
I
एक
think we
मीटिंग
have
चली
come.
हुई है, ठीक है ना, बाद में बात कर सकता हूँ मैं, अभी इस घंटा भर में बिजी हूँ.
So, you know, we have to change our mindset whether we will discuss TFR upfront in such a young lady who is not married yet, and obviously, you know, has those family and other issues in hand. So keeping that in mind, again, and I think Dr. Amrita has unmuted herself. So Dr. Amrita, will you decide the molecule keeping the profile of this young lady in mind, and what would you use?
I'm sorry, sir. Actually, I had logged out earlier on because of a technical issue. So
this is a young unmarried female who has no symptoms, incidentally detected to have CML when she developed a pneumonia and when the neutrophilic leukocytosis persisted. Okay, so we now know that she has CML, and what would be your choice and why? Yeah.
Okay, so this is a young lady, and obviously, first of all, we need to consider whether she is planning to conceive anytime soon, and her marital status. And so considering the fact that she is not planning to conceive soon, obviously, and if it is a low risk CML, sir, I think I would like to start with the first generation TKI imatinib only, and then monitor response, like the 3-monthly response that we have. Now again, in our like Indian scenario, other things need to be considered too, like the financial issues and all. So
now, I'll interrupt you here. Okay, though she had no symptoms, her SOCAL risk score is 1.35.
Okay, all right. So this is a high risk. This is a poor risk CML over here. So
yeah.
Right. So like I was reading some of this BCSH guideline, and we say the guideline says that in high risk CML, again we can consider starting with with frontline with second generation TKIs, nilotinib and dasatinib, and then because ma'am pointed out earlier on that the response rate is much better compared to first generation TKI over here. So over here, since the SOCAL score is high, and if the patient is compliant, and if so I think I would like to start with the second generation TKI over here compared to the first.
Okay, so do others agree that the moment you get a high risk patient, you would opt for a second generation TKI, or is there any difference of opinion? Anyone? If you all agree, then I.
So
yeah.
Sorry, so I'm sorry to interrupt. So basically, this in high risk SOCAL scores or patients with major root clonal chromosomal abnormalities. Well, first of all, sir, so I forgot to point this out. HLA typing should be done, and with consideration for an allogenic SCT. Now, second generation TKIs might be preferred for these patients, and since it has been shown to reduce the risk of CML progression, and particularly in patients, to have a defined high risk SOCAL score. So this is basically what I.
So what I'll give to the panel is, I'll give you, some of the treatment goals, and you can rank it, because, this is what goes on in our minds. Like, my first treatment goal obviously would be to prevent progression to accelerated phase or blast crisis. And then obviously a corollary would be increased survival. But as was discussed by Dr. Uma, rightly, that we want to achieve a probable TFR, achieve a, say, operational cure with minimum impact on quality of life, reproductive life, and avoiding complications. So when you are assessing this patient, out of all these treatment goals, which would be your topmost priority? Just, whether it's prevention of progression or increasing survival, or you'd be more concerned about the quality of life and reproductive life?
Obviously, survival and control of the illness is always the first goal of any for any of us, I believe, if when a patient presents to us. But having said that, with given so many choices now, when before CML hardly had any choices. So now with the amount of drugs that we have in this disease, we can look at the other goals as well, along with the survival. So I think it is very important to also discuss the other elements.
Okay. So now, since you mentioned the choices, so there are the choices that you may give imatinib 400, you may give imatinib 600, you may give nilotinib 300 BD, you may give dasatinib 100, you may give bosutinib 400 milligram OD. And as was pointed out by Dr. Amrita, you might look for a match considering she is young. So what would you start with? Like, I think Dr. Amrita, second generation, which one would you start? Not because it's a Novartis meeting.
No, definitely not.
Yeah, that is what I want to know. And how will you decide? Yeah.
So over here, I'm not very sure if there is a criteria over here to decide between dasatinib or nilotinib over here. But I guess we can go with any of the second generation TKIs and look for response. Like we usually monitor in 3 monthly intervals and see if there is adequate response, and if there is, then probably we carry on. So like with like experience, I mean, like what I have seen in the patients and all, in usually high risk patients. So what I have seen my seniors also doing, well, they in like 2-3 patients, I have seen them start with dasatinib, honestly. And moreover, so I'm not able to provide a proper explanation as to why, but
that is fine. That might be individual choices, because if you look at NCCN, their choices are there. So, I mean, in our practice, that is what we want to know through this panel discussion, that in our practice, how do we decide? Now, I'll give you a clue why I asked this, and this can be answered by any panelist, that this was incidentally detected, but she had a bout of pneumonia. Now, would that play in your mind? Or, no, she has completely recovered, imaging-wise, clinical-wise, parameter-wise, she's fine. So, basically what we do is, we know both second-generation TKIs can give a deep molecular response, right? And that is one of the things which we think of TFR. But how important is the side effect profile we keep in our back of the mind to select which one to be given?
Side effect profile, I think, is very, very important to understand. Patients who have, apart from this case, for patients who have cardiac comorbidities, probably dasatinib, or the vice versa. So depending upon the side effects, you definitely choose your drug. The other thing I always I try to use the drug which I'm more comfortable handling, or with whichever the side effects are easier to handle. So those are my comfort zone. So that is also very important for me to decide what second generation TKI I use. So nilotinib has a BD dosing, and dasatinib is a OD dosing. So the compliance again comes into picture, where whether she's going to be able to take it BD, or whether she's more comfortable taking once a day dosing. So all these factors would play a very, very important role in me deciding the treatment.
I think,
yeah, Dr. Divesh, please.
I will comorbid situations, whether patient is whether patient have any cardiac disease or any suffering from any lung disease or pulmonary disease. So I should consider the comorbid conditions as well, or previous any episodes, and side effect profile of second generation TKIs. Both, and third points is the cost. The cost of nowadays, the dasatinib and nilotinib and bosutinib. Dasatinib is cheaper more than the nilotinib and bosutinib.
Right.
So that both these three factors I will consider.
Right.
I will chip in, sir, just a bit. So first thing, I'll learn from my mistakes and try to understand the UTOS score for this patient. That is the first thing. Second thing would be like the time. The time has taught us is, since the availability of dasatinib, we have gotten enough exposure of using and enough experience of using dasatinib like in and out for multiple CML and like pH positive ALL, and that has taught us that what are the common complications and how those can be managed. Probably that was cost guided, but now since that recently this nilotinib has become almost equivalent in cost to dasatinib, the generic dasatinib, that makes us more comfortable in using lesser side effect causing drug, and that probably in my mind is nilotinib, because the only reason that dasatinib we have all seen bad pleural effusions, bad pneumonias, and all those side effects are bad because of that. And nilotinib, in whichever limited number of patients we had used previously because of the cost constraints, those somehow tend to have a lesser significant complications. Some rise in sugars, triglycerides, very rarely the peripheral venous diseases. So these are not very significantly that we have seen in the limited use of nilotinib, but recently we have started to use the nilotinib more so than dasatinib because of the cost availability that is now available rampantly to the patients.
Right. So I'll tell you what happened to the patient. The patient was started, I don't know whether patient was treated by me, but no problem. Patient was started on nilotinib 300 milligram BD. She developed complete hematological remission. She achieved BCR-ABL less than 10% at 3 months, less than 1% at 6 months. You'd feel that, she's actually following the ELN chart, and less than 0.1% at 1 year. She's under regular follow-up. Adherence to treatment is good. Now, my last question regarding this lady is, she has now plans of marriage, and obviously she tells us that once she's married, though we might talk of Indian World Women's Day and all, that she might not have an entire say in when she gets pregnant. So that is the question she asks us, that when can she plan to marry, and maybe can she get pregnant within, say, 1 to 2 years of marriage? So what would be? I think I can see meat, so I'm asking you, others can chip.
Sir, so so in that case, if the patient is getting, what I can understand is patient is getting married, and when the patient will plan for a baby, that is not yet decided. So in that case, that will depend probably on the family reasons. So in that case, probably switching to, earlier we switched to interferon based treatment, so as to avoid the toxicities of the TKIs, the wiser it will be for us. Further on, it will give us time to assess the response to interferon. By the time she is planning for a baby, we'll have an idea as in what good interferons are going to, is helping her in what way. So my suggestion in that case would be, if time is an open-ended factor, in that case, switching earlier to interferon would be advisable.
Would you not consider her achieving TFR and then going for the pregnancy?
Sir, she was already 23, and if she's getting married now, I'm like, so what timeline she is in right now? Like, we need to continue the second generation TK at least for 4.5, 5 years. So I'm not sure what's the timeline, what's the age, what's her age now, and depending on that, probably we can come to that conclusion.
Yeah. So I think if time is on her side and our side, then obviously achieving TFR, because I think that is one of the important platforms. You might say that everyone wants to achieve it and everyone wants to stop the drug, but I think this is one person who actually would be a genuine candidate if, she goes on like this, like I told you, the milestones achieved.
So
yeah, tell me.
I'm sorry to interrupt here, sir. Sir, like that's my general curiosity also. How many of us have tried for a TFR? Like, I don't know, like how many of us have done this for patient in practice?
Yeah. So anyone would volunteer, please?
I have done.
Sorry. I have done recently in one case. She want to become a young lady, young girl. Very few.
Okay.
I counseled one lady for it because she was a young girl, but she had one child and she said, that I will not do. I want to continue with the drug. So there are patients who actually are scared to stop the drug also.
Exactly. Monitoring is so intensive upon stopping that like whether they're willing to go for every 4 weeks, every alternate week of BCR-ABL testing and like things like that, are they able to support and understand the gravity of doing such intensive monitoring?
that is something that I think will have to be counseled to the patient, and they have to understand that the compliance is very, very important.
Crucial.
And even after stopping the drug, I think they'll have to wait for 6 to 8 months, because most of the patients, like 80%, if they have a MMR failure, it's usually within the 6 to 8 months. And if 1 year, if they are off the drug, then the likelihood that they can sustain it for a longer period of time is much more.
Okay. Yeah. So I think what we have discussed makes sense, because we also know that EMR failure in high so-called risk is almost 4 times less than with nilotinib compared to imatinib. So obviously, when you get a high risk, you can start with a second generation. And as we have discussed the cardiovascular effects, I think he lost me in between. So anyway,
Yes.
I'm back. Yeah, so I'm back, and what I was trying to discuss is that though there were more cardiovascular effects, it is said that death due to cardiovascular events has not been demonstrated to be more in nilotinib. And as we use it, I think we will learn more. So now I go to my second case. Professor Verma, you'd like to comment anything before I proceed to the second case?
I think we can go on to the second case. The only thing that I want to say is that we need to counsel these patients in fair details, because even when you are talking of treatment-free periods, they need to understand that the chances of this person being on long-term treatment-free is about less than 40% or 30%, and there are larger chances that she might actually have to go back on TKIs again, and that could be a setback for the pregnancies, and you might have to think of alternative strategies. So when you are discussing pregnancy as a major goal, you have to understand that there could be problems while you are attempting to withdraw the drug, even after a period at which it is supposed to be done.
That is well taken, and that is where the perspective comes in. So we should not give a rosy picture. Our aim is always to give neutrally what happens and what is there, but it's difficult, I know.
Yeah.
So as Sir has said, I go to the next case. This is a 48-year-old male, okay, who had loss of appetite, significant weight loss, abdominal fullness, hepatosplenomegaly, but ultimately when CML was diagnosed, the so-called risk score was 0.64. So I can tell you what happened to this patient. Patient was started on imatinib 400 milligram once daily. Okay. And it's low so-called score and eutocell data is not there. So how will you monitor this patient? Now, we know what ELN has said, what NCCN has said, but I would like to ask you honestly, what would you do? I mean, every 3 months, or say first 3 months, 6 months, then 1 year? Any one of you can volunteer, please.
Yes, I would like to monitor with at first 3 months, then 6 months, then 12 months, and then 18 months.
And this would be your BCR ABL international standard, right?
Yes, yes.
Yeah. So
at 3 months, if the level is less than 10%, that is adequate. And if at 6 months that is the less than 1%, that is adequate. The 1 log reduction is at each level.
Yeah. Now, what would you do if the BCR ABL is more than 10% at 3 months?
At 3 months?
At 3 months, yes.
So just I will check first the patient compliance, whether patient is taking the drugs regularly or not. So that my first question is patient compliance to the drug, whether he is taking drug regularly.
Right. I think, and I'll tell you what, when we sat with the patient, we found that during the 3rd month, as he was feeling better, he had omitted almost 3 doses every week, right? So what we did was, we counseled the patient, said that, you still have a golden opportunity. So we started imatinib 400 milligram once daily. And at 6 months, we repeated the RQ-PCR. and then it came as 15.5%. So what will you do now?
Sir, at this time, again, if ask for compliance. If patient have compliance is fine, patient is taking drug regularly, then I will check for the mutation analysis and further for mutation analysis, and then check whether the mutation is present or not.
Okay. So I think others also agree on it. And I'll tell you what the mutation report came as. So BCR-ABL kinase domain mutation, it showed a mutation in H396R. Okay. So you don't worry about, I can tell you only one thing, that is basically sensitive to both dasatinib and nilotinib, right? But imatinib resistance can be there. So what would you do now?
So again, we'll start in select the drug to know the comorbid condition, whether there is cardiovascular condition or the pulmonary condition is present or not. Then cost constraint, whether the cost constraint is there or not. Then I will switch. I will start with any second generation TKI if there is no other any contraindication. I will start with nilotinib if there is no cardiovascular contraindication.
Yeah. So I'll tell you something. After the generic dasatinib has come and nilotinib's price has reduced, I think none of us are increasing the dose of imatinib, right? 600, 800, which we used to do earlier, right? So that is fine. And in this patient was switched to nilotinib 400 milligram BD. Okay. At 3 months follow-up, that means now you have almost the 9 months. BCR-ABL1 RT-PCR 8%. Are you happy, or would you like to do something?
Sir,
yeah. Please
so I presume the nilotinib was 400 milligram twice a day, sir, in this patient.
Yeah, it was 400 milligram twice a day. Exactly. Hello.
I would like to continue with the same drug.
Yeah. I think all of us agree on this. Dr.
BCR-ABL less than 10% at 3 month interval. I think that is optimal response, sir. So I think.
Yeah. And so I'll tell you, and at 36 months, this patient actually achieved MR 4.5. Okay. Then at 4 years, so at 3 years, you achieve 4.5, you are very happy. But at 4 years, by this time, he is 52 years old, and considering he is an Indian, he developed severe chest pain, investigated, coronary heart disease, angioplasty done. So received triple antiplatelets, and CBC and RQ-PCR shows deep molecular remission persisting. So MR 4.5 since 2 years till 4 years. So 2 years of MR 4.5. Now what will you do?
Sir, I think switch over to another TKIs because nilotinib can't give further because of cardiovascular condition and recent MI. So that will switch over to dasatinib.
And that is what the treating hematologist did. So because as I told you, it was both sensitive to nilotinib as well as dasatinib. So he was switched to dasatinib 100 milligram just 4 months back. Okay. And he has been doing well. His RQ-PCR is maintained at 3 months after switching. Now I come to the question which Dr. Rahul was discussing in the beginning. Can we reduce the dose to even dasatinib-related pulmonary toxicity in future by reducing the dose to 50 milligram daily? What is your opinion? Because obviously we do not have enough evidence, but still I think we can share our views.
But I think patient.
Yes.
Sir, if the patient has achieved CMR 4.5,
Yes.
so for 2 consecutive years or 4 consecutive RT-qPCR's result 3 months apart, then I think that falls in one of the criteria in which PFR can be attempted.
Yeah. But as we discussed earlier also, TFR has its own issues, and one of the major issues in India is obviously the quality of monitoring and the cost of monitoring. So sometimes
it is not the patients who have failed
Dr.
at
Bora,
first
मैं एक
line of
meeting में हूँ,
TKI.
थोड़ी देर में
Yeah,
बात
If
करें.
absolutely.
patients who have failed, I think TFR is not for them yet. It may come in the future, but not right
9
now.
बजे के बाद.
So the most important thing here is patient had not response to the first agent used. So here the only question is whether we can reduce it by 50 milligram.
I honestly, so if there is toxicity, I would probably consider reducing it. If not, then I am not comfortable yet, because he's already failed one TKI, and
Yeah.
you know, and he is on, and if he's tolerating 100 milligram dasatinib, I would not want, because I don't think the data is enough to tell me that 50 is as good as 100 yet.
Okay. I think I agree, but are there any differences of opinion? Meet?
Sir, I agree with the same thing, sir. Unless, like, till the time we have more mature data, it's better to continue with the same dose.
And considering that this patient has failed one line of therapy, right?
Absolutely, sir.
I think it
Absolutely.
is more important.
Yes, sir.
Yeah. So basically, I think what boils down to in both the cases, ultimately we are choosing the drugs more on the side effect profile if we consider the second generation drugs. For the first generation, obviously, we have a long history. We probably know imatinib well, better than this. But when we decide about TFR or even, you know, whether there are other issues and whether the patient is high risk, we might use a second generation where our opinion is more dictated by what are the comorbidities. I think any one of you want to add something, otherwise I'll now go back to Professor Verma.
I think that's quite sums it up well, sir. Thank you so much.
Yeah, so over to Professor Verma, please.
Thank you, Prantar, for very beautifully highlighting as to the situations in which you would use second generation. I think it seems that with the current costs, many people are actually thinking that second generation would be the best way to go forward in the beginning itself. But in our Indian context, there are many patients who can't even afford the so-called reduced cost of the second generation. So I think first generation is still likely to stay with us for certain individuals. But there are situations where you would actually think of second generation upfront. And then you will have to see which one of the 2 or 3 you would like to use. And that's where the side effect profile, as well as comorbidities, as well as the other laboratory investigations that you do in these patients come into the being in selecting what is the best option. And if you are changing from first generation to second generation, obviously the mutational status itself would be very important for us to know for choosing between the two agents, whether both of them can be used or only one can be used. Thank you very much. And do we have now time for the talk by Dr. Bhargav?
So Dr. Bhargav will log in sometime, sir.
So it's already 8:15, you know, and we have only 15 minutes. So are there any other questions from the panelists or any other points that you would like to say?
Does it make a point?
Sorry, carry on.
So does it make a point to like if the case Professor Prantar was discussing about the second case, the patient is PF is negative for the BCR-ABL 4.5 after 2.5 years. Does it make a point to repeat the imaginary resistance analysis to know whether the clone has disappeared or not?
So it would be, I mean, what method would you use for imatinib resistance? The usual Sanger sequencing is actually not useful in patients who have less than 1% of the BCR-ABL positivity. So you'll have to use the NGS to really find out if there is any. So I don't think that.
That's going to
you know, remission at 4.5 is something where it would be very difficult to do by a routine method.
It would be difficult, and Obviously, why do you want to do it? So that you want to go back to imatinib? Meet?
So,
What
so,
we
so,
are doing?
actually, no one does this. This is just an hypothetical question to just understand. Like, do we need to monitor the disappearance of the clone that has worried us so much for all the time?
So one of the things that we must understand from the things as they are is that if we stop treatment at the same level of so-called residual disease, in 60% of them, it would come back. So there would be some disease somewhere, right? In the other 40% in whom it does not come back, is it just because there is no disease, or is it because his immunological status is such that he is not allowing the disease to come back? So both the things are important. You know, I mean, we really don't understand what are the host factors which are also responsible for control of the disease. So initially people said that if you have an NK cell activity that is higher, then the chances of your attaining molecular remissions is higher. So I really don't know whether we really know the answer in a single individual. I understand what you are saying. So, but issue is that even if you show a small clone of cells, right, would you say that this clone would actually grow once we take off the drugs?
The reason why I ask is because we have switched from one medication to other, and whether BCR ABL monitoring alone or the clone monitoring may be superior. So that is the intent, because we already changed from a sensitive drug to the alternative drug for this patient.
I'm not sure if there are any tests which would be sensitive enough to detect
I agree
a mutation at that, you know, at that level of MRD.
Yeah.
So I mean, I don't think there is an answer to your answer to that question.
So you know, you say that the leukemic stem cells tend to persist for a long time.
Yeah, absolutely.
And the problem basically is that even if you find a leukemic stem cell, will it actually grow, or will it be allowed to grow in a body milieu to a level where disease is detected is some question that we really don't know, right?
Yes.
So is Dr. Bhargav there, or are we going to stop?
Sir, he's not there, sir.
Okay, so he's going to come at exactly 8:25, right? Okay. And what about the other talk that is taken off?
So the other talk, Sir Niti ma'am had done the other talk. So
the only talk which is left is from Dr. Bhargav only, Dr. Amit Bhargav only, sir.
Okay.
Yeah. So if he's not
So
there,
can Dr. Rahul Bhargav deliver the talk on behalf of Dr. Amit Bhargav?
So Rahul, what was the what is the take-home message from his talk, and then we can maybe discuss that a little bit.
Yeah.
So the only, I mean, though I have not seen the talk, but I would realize that the take-home message was how the second generation TKI from a second line therapy can become the first line therapy. That's the only thing. And I tweeted quite a long back last year, the CML needs to be seen in a manner whether you want to achieve a TFR or you don't want to achieve a TFR. If you want to achieve a TFR, probably the second generation might be the first line therapies. But if you not, then imatinib is good to go. Though the difference is very small. So we need to highlight when we see the curves, it is not always that your second generation TKIs are going to bring about the TFR. So imatinib also can bring in selected patients. So how you approach a patient, I would really buy your argument that the first generation remains the first line and the second generation can become the alternative lines, provided how you see and how you monitor these patients at 3 months, 6 months, and 12 months. I think the new things which are going to come up is probably the suboptimal response criteria are going to go away at some point or the other, because those are actually not adding any value to it in a clinical sense. It just keeps a highlight because we are monitoring them at 3, 6, and 12 months. Whether we really need a suboptimal, if you have 22% BCR-ABL, would you like to change? I would jump. My department jumps in, but many other departments don't jump onto the fray of changing it. So I say the CML is evolving, and how the philosophy, one philosophy can't fit in all for all patients. I see patients in Meerut, Gorakhpur, Bareilly. Imatinib still remains the choice, drug of choice. While coming back, the next morning when come to Fortis, probably nilotinib and dasatinib becomes the first line therapy. So I would say it's a very, very individual how you use it, how you see the patients, how you, I mean, the SoCal and Hesford are good enough, but really, do you really change on that basis? I'm still very skeptical about it. But yes, the science is moving very fast. Newer drug, the 5th drug is going to be soon available in India by the end of this year. And things are really going to make a huge difference in the lives of CML. So whatever we do, please keep in mind that people still keep on going into blast crisis. These patients needs to be controlled. How we control is we need to deep dive into the data of MR 4.5, probably nil goes into the blast crisis. Major cytogenetic response people, 2 to 3 people will go. Major molecular response, 1 person will go, but MR 4.5, 0.0032, 0% will go into blast crisis. So I think deeper the response, the chances of less going into the blast crisis, because there's the end of the story. You don't need a second chance is an argument while using a second line therapy as a first line therapy. And we need to have our own data to understand how many percentage point we can actually utilize or bring it down the chances of blast crisis when you use a second line therapy. But the economy plays a major, major role. Monitoring remains a major cornerstone. And as Dr. Verma will always put it into perspective, that we are a very, very heterogeneous country with a varying power of economic strength. So we need to keep a watch onto that, and we need to move ahead in CML, providing the best care with the best cost.
Yeah, Rahul. So basically, I think it boils down to understanding the disease and also the economy. I mean, both things are important. It's not a short-term treatment, it's a long-term treatment. You know, we are talking of at least 6 years of treatment. That's the minimum, even if you are talking about TFR. And therefore, I think those things are very, very important for us to consider and discuss upfront. I'm not saying that we should go with our own idea as to what needs to be done. We can put it to the person, but ultimately we have to understand that he has to buy the drug for the next 6 years. And that is important. Sometimes that becomes a major issue. So even if he is not taken drug, he will come and tell you, sir, I had taken the drug. So he'll miss out on certain dosages. And those things are important for us to understand. But I agree that I think achieving deeper responses is the goal. As of now, you would say achieving a TFR is the goal for most of us, provided it's achievable. And we must try for it. And let's hope that the things get better. And maybe we'll have to play with the drugs. Maybe we need to sequence them in our setup or something of that kind to have more cost-effective treatments.
Thank you, Dr. Verma. Thank you, Dr. Neeti. Thank you, Pranta. Thank you, all the panelists. And of course, thanks, Novartis, for this wonderful, exciting stimulus discussions which we had over past 1.5 hours. It is great to meet all of you on a Zoom meeting as the COVID is still coming back. I hope all the people have taken their vaccination. Stay safe, stay blessed.